Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for the Voice of Leadership and for Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership. And today we are talking about renewable energy. We are talking about alternative energy. And my question is, do we have the cart before the horse? So at the time of this recording in the United States, we are going through the aftermath and also the middle of a serious hurricane, Hurricane Helene. And Hurricane Helene is affecting the southeastern part of the United States, particularly Florida, also the Carolinas, and even to Atlanta, Georgia. And so, what I want to note is that there's the question of whether electric cars, if we know enough about them to really have them be used wholesale all the time for everything. As part of this hurricane, one of the things that we're learning is that electric vehicles, once they've been submerged into salt water, a few days later, they are likely to burst into flames. And there's some specifics about those flames. The fire is extremely severe. And if your car is near your home, the fire can destroy both the car and your home. And we also find from the firefighters, they say that they're really having a difficult time extinguishing these fires with the battery operated electric cars. There's something about those lithium batteries. And for those of you who fly frequently, as I do, there are warnings on the airline. If you have a lithium battery in something, you have to take it out and they have to know that you've got that with you. And maybe because of the explosion possibilities, even for those who have lithium batteries that are powering their briefcases. So not only are these fires difficult to extinguish, even with water on them constantly, and they do have to keep them watered, they pretty much have to go out on their own. So we find that in Florida, there have been a number of homes that have been destroyed and cars that have been destroyed because of the flooding, the saltwater impact, and these batteries. So some of the counsel has been not to park your car near your house so that if indeed the car does catch on fire, you don't also lose your home. So these are some pretty serious and intense fires. And so before I go any further, I want to say that my heart goes out to all those who are experiencing loss and devastation from hurricanes and fires and floods and earthquakes and other weather related disasters. And specifically at this time for those who are suffering the impacts of Hurricane Helene. Now, as we're talking about this, I'm really talking more broadly about alternative energy sources. And I'm wondering if we are approaching the use of alternative energy in the most wise way. And first, let me also say that I support renewable and alternative energy sources beyond oil and gas. Sources such as solar and electricity and wind and water, hydro and geothermal, all of these have their place. All of these can be valuable to us in terms of our journey and life here on the earth. And yet there are 5 points I want to make about some challenges with these issues as well. Number one, I'm wondering if we have a situation of mandates before we have true scalability of the new energy sources. And in the United States, there's a lot of an aggressive posture and stance on renewable energy. And some states in the United States, such as California, are particularly aggressive with respect to implementing renewable energy. So when I go to California, and most places in the US, but California is even more so the case, I often have to rent cars as part of my business travel and business trip. And what I have noticed is that the price of the gas powered cars, they have purposefully increased the price, inflated the price, often to a point where it's double the price of an electric car. There seems to be an intention to get everyone to rent electric cars. Now, when you're in a foreign city, one that you're not familiar with, an electric car can be quite difficult. You don't know where the electric charging stations are located. There may not be any that are near where you're going to be staying in your hotel. There may not be one at your hotel. And of course, when I'm traveling and flying, I have a very aggressive schedule to keep. I have to get on airplanes at particular times. And so, what if I don't find a charging station that's near the hotel? How will I get from where the car is being charged to where I'm staying, get back to it? It's just a lot of hassle in that sense when you're not familiar with something. Now, for those who have an electric vehicle as their personal vehicle, that's a lot easier because you have the electricity in your home. You can charge your car overnight and before you go out the door because it takes hours to charge and recharge electric vehicles. And so I think we should be aware of that. Also, I find it interesting that it would be one thing to create an incentive for the electric car by making it less expensive. However, in addition to that, they've made the gas powered cars purposefully more expensive. They didn't keep those the same, they inflated the cost of that. So we have in the United States and in California in particular, very aggressive compliance dates for when they want to get rid of all gas powered cars and have electric cars on the market. And there's still a lot that we don't know about making that kind of change. And it's not scalable because for the average family, everyday home, they cannot afford an electric car. Most of them are extremely expensive and you're not going to be able to, on a normal salary of the average American, be able to afford the electric car. So that's one challenge that I see is that we have these mandates before it's really a scalable solution that you can implement with the average American citizen. So right now, it's still an option for people who have a lot of income and resources. Number two, I would say that we have mandates before we have proper safety testing. And that produces sometimes some unintended consequences. So let me give some examples of what I'm talking about. When I talk about safety testing, there's testing that occurs under ideal or clinical or laboratory conditions. It does not necessarily mimic real life. So, of course, when manufacturers are making anything new, you have that form of testing. Secondly, you have testing under what I call everyday conditions. This is what's typical. This is where people will mostly be using the product, including an electric car, and we're going to test it under those conditions to see if it passes. So we have that as well. And then thirdly, third category is extreme catastrophic conditions or emergency conditions, such as a hurricane, and where there's flooding of salt water. Do we know enough about what happens under those conditions with electric cars? And we're finding out through the hurricane that no, maybe we don't know as much. Electric cars have been touted as very safe, less likely to catch on fire. And yet, what we're learning is that in the saltwater hurricane condition, they're more likely to catch on fire and not immediately, but maybe a few days later. We also find that in cold weather climates, such as if you're in the northern parts of Canada, where it gets many, many degrees below zero, that these batteries may not work as well. So those are some extreme conditions that happen every year for people living in those regions. So do these batteries truly work in cold weather, frigid temperatures? And before we mandate that everyone have an electric car, what if you live in a flood prone zone? Or what if you live in a sub-zero temperature climate on a regular basis? What's going to be the impact on you? And I think that this testing issue is we're often rushing to the market rather than taking our time to find out if something is appropriate or not. And that applies to other areas such as medications. We find that medications are being fast tracked onto the marketplace and there are side effects and there are unintended consequences that occur later. We have such an increase right now in cancers and heart conditions and in neurological conditions, which may very well be due to fast tracking medications that were used even over the pandemic period. So I think we have to be very careful about that. We also have to think about what it takes to create new forms of energy that are renewable. There's sort of the myth out there that you won't have to use oil and gas or that there won't be anything dangerous that gets stored. Yet we know that batteries in the landfill can also be a problem. We also know that for many forms of these energy sources, it does require some powering by oil and gas entities in order for it to work. And yet that's not being talked about. So we're not really completely getting rid of oil and gas to begin with, and we're not being honest about that. Also, think we need to talk about issues like self-driving cars, and there have been many accidents and fatalities as a result. And yet, some people are becoming quite cavalier in how safe they think this is, so that you could actually be in your car and possibly have a bar in there and be drinking and driving or whatever because you're not really having to drive the car. When in reality, this is such new technology, everyone needs to be alert while they're in a car, even if it's a self-driving one. And we need to understand more about when these accidents occur, what the reason is, and what's driving those outcomes so that they can be addressed and they can be fixed. So again, inadequate safety testing is an issue, and really understanding how new technology works under adverse conditions. And that takes time. It takes time to collect that information and research. And before we have wholesale mandates, we might want to collect a bit more research. I would also say we're going for mandates prior to having the proper infrastructure in place. And I already mentioned that you could be in a remote area, not be able to find a charging station for an electric car. And again, the whole notion that it takes a long time, to charge these vehicles. And if you want an electric car and you order one today, quite frequently you're going to wait a long time, even as long as a year or so, to get the vehicle. So they're not making enough of them for everyone to get one. And yet those mandates are coming up even sooner than we'll have the capacity to build what the need may be in the future. I also want to mention some mindset issues that I think are a challenge when it comes down to new technology. So, number 5 on the mindset issues, I see an atmosphere of a punitive mindset more than an inspirational mindset. If something is really great, you do not have to punish people for using the old methodology. In other words, if gas powered cars are really not appropriate in today's time, people are going to get the electric car, talk it up, tell their friends all about it, and organically, people will want electric cars. And that's actually happening already. People are finding some value in electric vehicles. So there's really no need to be punitive in the sense of significantly increasing the cost to rent a gas powered car just to force people to rent an electric car. And as for me, I still choose to rent the gas car because of all the things I've mentioned. I don't think we quite have the infrastructure in place for me traveling on the road in a foreign city to be able to use the electric car. I think that the same kind of mentality happened during the pandemic, even with the vaccines, rather than to tout how they were helping people, benefiting people, and those who were taking the vaccines were not getting sick. You tell the good news story if there is a good news story, and that's a big if. And often what I'm finding is that when there's not such a good news story, then the punitive actions are in place to force people to engage in whatever the dominant narrative is at the time. And it may not be because whatever is being promoted is better. It might not be better. And that same thing holds true for even food that's genetically modified or food that is laboratory created as opposed to the natural food on our earth that comes from proper farming and using the methodologies that God has put in place for us. And when we go in some of those directions, we compromise our safety. We don't know what those unforeseen, unintended consequences may be. It could be that this increase in cancer and everything else that we're seeing could be because we have fake food in abundance in our diet. So we really need to think about that. Hi, this is Dr. Karen dropping into today's show to remind you that one of the most important roles of an executive leader is to quickly make big and right decisions for the business. Are you looking for an experienced and trusted advisor to come alongside you as a thinking partner as you make those decisions? Then contact me at Dr. Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. Now, back to the show. Also, I know there are a lot of commercials sometimes on television about medications that are out, and they'll say, oh, if you have a hard time sleeping, take this particular medication or this kind of preparation. And then they say, and you'll be sleeping much more soundly in minutes. And then they give you all the warnings of the potential side effects. You may have gastrointestinal distress. You might develop an ulcer. You might have a heart attack. And then ultimately say, and then there's the risk of death. Now I'm thinking to myself, let me just drink some chamomile tea if I'm having a hard time falling asleep. And I think the risk factor will be much less in that case. And sometimes we just create things where we're overdoing it and we don't really need to overdo it that much. So I had an experience recently. I was going to the eye doctor and my eye had an infection that needed to be treated. So the eye doctor had previously prescribed a medication that was very harsh and very difficult on my eye. It felt like I was putting just pure acid in my eye. My eye got bloodshot red. It was irritated, inflamed. And it wasn't until after I stopped taking the medicine that the eye actually healed. So I said, I don't want that medicine again. I want something that's less caustic. And he was saying, well, I don't think the antibiotic in that would cause that. And it probably didn't. It was probably the preservatives. It was probably all the other garbage that was put into the eye drop to keep it sterile. And those are the things that I reacted negatively to. Because when I go to the eye doctor, I have to take my own saline solution because I am allergic to the solution that they have in the office. And they keep the one in the office that they have, since it's a public place, it has all of these things in it to help prevent germs and infections. Yet for me, it causes a lot of problems. So this time he prescribed something that was an older medication. And I found frequently that older medications are my friend because they've been road tested. They've been tested on a lot of people. And whatever the side effects are, whatever the downside is, we kind of have a good sense of what that is because that medicine's been out there for a while. And as I was taking that medication, it did not have the same effect of acid in my eye. My eye did not get red and my eye started to heal from the medication. So again, one size doesn't fit all. I'm sure a lot of the other patients at that clinic can use the medication that he originally prescribed. Yet for me, it was a problem. So we've got to think about this as it comes down to alternative energy sources. One size solution does not fit all. If you live in a hurricane zone, if you live in a cold weather zone, you may need some other alternatives and options. And so we sometimes get a little carried away when we want to impose the same solution on everyone. So I think we should explore alternative energy. We should bring some things into the foreground that would be an augmentation to what we're using now with oil and gas. And that doesn't mean we get rid of oil and gas right away because we really need to have a transition period. And then in that transition, we learn about the new technology, the new energy source, and we start to develop solutions for challenges that come up. And in transition, you give your environment a chance to be able to produce at the level that's necessary for the demand that will be coming in the future. And it's my thought, you don't have to mandate something that's a good thing because people want what is good and what's going to be beneficial to them and what's going to help them. So let it happen naturally is what I would say. When it comes down to mindset, I would also remind us that God has a plan and purpose in terms of this world and our lives. He created man, which God defined as both male and female, in his image. And I just want to note something about that, about God creating us in his image. If we look at Genesis, the first chapter, and verses 27 and 28, it says that, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So when God was using the term man, it meant woman and man, both male and female. Then verse 28, it says, then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And we know that Adam had the responsibility of even naming all of the animals. So we have a stewardship responsibility here to take care of the earth, to take care of the animals, but also we are in charge of the earth. God put us here to be in charge of the earth. And the benefits and blessings of the earth are largely for our benefit. And we should husband the earth in the sense of doing a good job and stewarding the resources that we've been given in a way that makes sense and that is sustainable and that honors God. So that's a responsibility. And yet I think we need to remember that man is the one that God has created in his image. And all the bounty here is in large part for, first of all, his glory and for our benefit. So we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we're doing everything. Oh, we've got to protect this animal. Oh, we've got to protect this plant. And in the meantime, we're starving ourselves or we're not thriving because we have things in a reverse order. Now, with that in mind, I want to remind you about the old Aesop's fable. And that old Aesop's fable is about the old man, the boy, and the donkey. And there are different versions of this fable, but I'm going to tell it this way today. There was an old man, there was a boy, and a donkey, and they were walking along the roadside to go to the marketplace. Ostensibly, maybe the donkey was going to be sold at the marketplace. We don't necessarily know. And as they were going along, they were walking alongside the donkey, the boy, and the old man. Some of the countrymen came up and said, well, this is ridiculous. Why are you walking alongside the donkey? Don't you know that a donkey is designed to be ridden? That's just insane that you are not using the donkey for its intended purpose. So the old man and the boy said, oh, okay. So they got on the donkey and they were riding the donkey because that's how they thought it should be. And as they were going along, some people said, why are you overloading that donkey with all of this weight? That's just too much. And so they both got off the donkey. And then as they were riding further along, because now the old man said, well, I'll put the boy on the donkey, so it's less weight. So the boy is on the donkey, and they come across the men, and they said, what? You have this young man on the donkey while the old man's got to walk? That's a disgrace. So they were thinking that the boy should walk because he's younger and stronger. So they reversed things. They put the old man on the donkey, and they put the boy walking beside the donkey. And they go along further in that configuration. And they come across some young women. And the women said, what? You have this old man on the donkey and that young boy is walking? That's a disgrace. So at this point, they had tried so many solutions. They didn't know what else to do. And so they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a pole. They got a pole. They tied the donkey's feet up and had the donkey suspended on this pole on their shoulders. And the boy and the old man were carrying the donkey. You can imagine the outrage when they went along in that configuration, and people thought they were insane. And as one version of the story goes, the donkey got loose out of this configuration over a body of water, fell in, and drowned. And of course, the moral of the story is that you can't please everybody. And when you try to please all, you end up not pleasing anyone. And of course, they weren't doing what made sense for them in their circumstance and in their situation. So we have to look at what makes sense for us to do. There are times that it might make sense for the old man to be on the donkey. There may be times when the little boy should be on the donkey. There should maybe times when they need to both be walking alongside. It depends on what else is going on in the scenario and the information we may not know or have access to. So, the bottom line, I would say, as people of God, we need to listen to his advice and counsel about where we are and what we're doing. And we have to remember what Psalm 24:1 says, that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So, everything we do down here, we want to do with his advice and counsel, because he's the one who made the earth and everything in it. He understands how everything down here works, and he also understands how he's made us and how he intends for us to operate as well. So, with this in mind, I would like to conclude today by reading an account in Mark, the second chapter, verses 23 to 28. And this is an occasion in the life of Jesus when he was on the earth walking with his apostles, and they were getting criticized for something they were choosing to do. And this was about the Sabbath. And we know that when God created the earth in the 6 days, he made the seventh day a day of rest. He had that day to be a holy day. And God, being God, of course, does not need to rest. He's all powerful and can do any and everything. Yet, as a model to us, he sanctioned the seventh day as a day of rest because we, as humans, need that rest. So, here under the first covenant of God, which at this time the world was under that first covenant, here's the account. Mark, the second chapter, verse 23. Now it happened that he went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and they're speaking about Jesus. And as they went, his disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" So, just for context, it wasn't lawful to just be picking grain in the grain fields. That was considered work. And his disciples are picking grain. So the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders of the day, are saying, "Why are you doing this? This is not right." So we see in verse 25, Jesus answers and he says, "But he said to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and hungry, he and those with him, how he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the showbread, which is not lawful to eat except for the priests, and also gave some to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man, which is Jesus, is also Lord of the Sabbath." So when we think about what we're doing in today's world, we want to remember the principle that's taught here. This world, God has prepared for us. He's given us a beautiful home on earth to live in, and it is made for our enjoyment. It is made for our sustenance and our thriving and our abundance. And we want to remember that the world was made for us, not us for the world. And the decisions that we make, we need to take that into consideration. If you get too wound up and think that you are created for the Sabbath, for example, you'll find yourself being so oppressed that the day of rest will not even be restful. And God's intention was a day of rest, not that his people would be oppressed on that day and not be able to do anything. The same is true for us living here on the earth. And we know that Jesus Christ, being the Lord of the Sabbath, is our Sabbath rest. We have our rest in him. So we want to slow down and facilitate success in all spheres of our lives without overburdening ourselves in a way that God did not intend, because he has set us free. And so I encourage all of us, let's walk in our freedoms, even as we explore alternative and renewable energy sources, including electric cars. And let's not get the cart before the horse or find ourselves carrying the donkey. Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, President and CEO of Trans Leadership Incorporated. Did you know that workplaces can make a significant difference in the lives of people and that you can create a positive culture that gets positive business results and also produces positive life experiences for your employees and your clients and customers. You can make a significant contribution to the world by creating the kind of culture where your people can bring their gifts to provide the most relevant and excellent products and services to your marketplace. What the research shows is that companies with excellent leadership are also more profitable. So as you flourish and as you grow in the world, you can do more for yourself as well as for others. So if this is resonating with you and you want to create a positive, profitable, and powerful corporate culture, and you care about succession, leaving the organization in a better position than when you found it, do keep in mind that that kind of legacy is something that's intentional. And I am happy to partner with you to take your organization to the next level and create that positive leadership culture. So reach me at Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. You've been listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. And I want to give a special thanks to jazz saxophonist Ron McMillan for granting us permission to use his gifted music on our show. Thanks for listening, and remember to go to my website, transleadership.com, for more strategies, insights, and leadership resources.